Hello everyone, I'm Vedant from Utsav App, and today we have brought to you another amazing and exclusive podcast. So, the rich and the glorious heritage of Bharat has actually always left its onlookers spellbound. Our scriptures and our culture and our mythologies are so varied, both in quantity and in quality, that it has always instilled a sense of deep curiosity amongst all throughout the channels of history. And so discuss with you all and with us in more detail today, we have with us Dr. Vineet Aggarwal, whom I think most of you know. And even though Dr. Vineet Aggarwal is a doctor by qualification and the manager by profession, that definitely hasn't stopped his blog Decode Hindu Mythology from gaining more than 2 million views worldwide. And Dr. Vineet has also penned several famed books. To name a few, would be Vishwamitra, Bharat, and The Legend of Parshu-RAAM. So, welcome, Dr. Vineet Aggarwal. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you today. And we at Utsav App are very happy to have this opportunity to interact one on one with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vedant. It's my pleasure completely. And I think this we have been in discussion since a while now, and it was a little difficult to get this arranged, but I'm glad that we are finally doing this conversation.
Yeah. So without further ado, I would be diving right into it because we have a lot of questions to shoot at you. That our history and our mythology is so varied with so many plots, so many stories, so many things. So out of these so many great characters that are mentioned and penned out in our history, what exactly made you choose these specific two characters, that is of Vishwamitra and Parshuram, that inspired you to write whole dedicated books about them?
The reason I chose these characters was precisely because there were no books about them. So, there are so many books about characters from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and everybody knows the stories, right? The basic plots of Ramayana and Mahabharata everybody's aware of it. And, a lot of people, a lot of authors who get into mythofiction as a genre, they would pick up one of these characters. And I wanted to do something different because, Ramayana and Mahabharata, even though they are great lessons, for us, but since they are accessible more or less to a lot of people through television, through readings, through, Ram Leelas, etc., I wanted to bring out the stories of certain characters that are not well known. And our, as you said, our mythology, what we call mythology, it's basically the legends and the stories from the Purans and the epics. They are so varied and so diverse. It's I think it's criminal that we haven't explored it, to its full extent. We have barely scratched the surface of the stories and the teachings and the characters that are available in our scriptures. And that was the precise reason I wanted to pick up characters that are not very well known. People may have heard their name. I did not want to pick up a character which was completely unknown. There had to be some recognition of the name at least, but the stories were not well known. And these characters have played a very important role in shaping our history, in shaping our society. So that is the reason I picked up. I started with Vishwamitra. And while researching for Vishwamitra, I realized that his story was not over, with his accomplishments, because he was born of a boon, of which the second part was Parshuram. So these stories are interrelated. A lot of people do not know that Parshuram and Vishwamitra are related by blood. And so when I was writing Vishwamitra, that's when I realized that, the second book has to be on the second part of the boon, which was Parshuram. And while doing Parshuram, I realized that, there was a possibility of creating a trilogy of sorts. And that is why Bharat, who's again related, he's the grandson of Vishwamitra. And that's how, they are, all three of them are connected through their familial ties, as well as the achievements that all of them, accomplished through their own hard work. They were not gods. They were not, even though Parshuramji is considered one of the incarnations of Lord Vishnu, but he was not a complete incarnation. He was not a Sampurna avatar. So he was blessed with certain powers by God, and such avatars are known as Avish avatars. So they're given special powers. They are humans which are given special powers by God to accomplish a certain task. So all three of them, even though they were born humans, they accomplished things that are unimaginable for a normal or an ordinary human being to do. So that is why I find their stories very, very inspiring. And that's the reason I picked up these characters. And through these stories, hopefully educate more people about these legends from our history.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, could you actually elaborate a little about what relation do Parshuram and Vishwamitra share, and what is that relation that they share, and the paradoxic nature of that?
Well, so I would suggest you go through the book for that. But yes, I can give you a little background. So Vishwamitra's sister was married to a certain rishi, and this rishi created a potion for Vishwamitra was not born till then. This lady was the only child. She was a princess, and she was married to a rishi. So the rishi created a potion for her wife as well as his mother-in-law, who did not have any other child, to get an heir. So this potion, which was divided between these two women, this forms the backdrop of that boon, which resulted in the birth of both Vishwamitra and Parshuram. And so their relationship is actually of a great uncle or a grand uncle and nephew. So, but in that's the actual relationship. But if you see, they were born almost just one generation apart. Even though the relationship is of two generations difference, they were actually born just one generation apart, because Vishwamitra's sister and his mother both gave birth to children at the same time because of this boon. So it's a very interesting relationship. It's a very complex sounding, but fairly simple relationship of an uncle and a nephew. And they were not mentioned in any scriptures to have ever come together at one place, except for Sita Ji's Swamvar. But there also, we get that story only from Ramcharitmanas and the other versions of the Ramayana. In Valmiki Ramayana, actually, they do not meet. And actually, Vishwamitra departs after the Swamvar, and that is when Parshuram arrives. So it was very interesting for me to explore that relationship, that, they are related to each other by blood. And still in the scriptures, they are nowhere shown together, interacting. And so it's a very beautiful relationship, I feel. And, both of them would have definitely, got together sometime. And, Parshuram would have met Vishwamitra at least some point of time in his life. So I've utilized that aspect of the relationship as well, in my book. And I've explored Parshuram's relationship with the other people who existed at that time. Similarly for Bharat as well, who were the other kings existing at that time. And in fact, Parshuramji, if you remember, he's credited to have destroyed the evil Kshatriyas 21 times. So who was remaining? Who were the kings that were remaining actually, who were not evil, who were spared by Parshuram? And, the kingdoms were scattered, a lot of kings and their, the Kshatriyas, the royal Senapatis and the generals, etc., were all killed by Parshuram. So in the aftermath of Parshuram's, mission, is when Bharat comes into the picture. And that is when, he ties up with the other kings who are remaining, and he binds the whole nation together, giving it his name, Bharat. So it's a very beautiful relationship amongst all three of them. And I've taken a little bit of liberty, of creative liberty, and I've actually put each of them in others' lives at some point of time at least.
Okay, so I would actually request our audience to please read the books to not lose the essence of what he said, because it cannot be just said in few lines in 5 minutes. Of course, you have to read the book to get it. Speaking about Parshuram, also what we get to know that he is perhaps still around. So he is one of the chosen ones, one of the Chiranjeevis. So can you explain what exactly is that? Like, is it only in spirit of philosophy, or also do you mean it in flesh and bone?
So, according to the scriptures, they are supposed to be there in flesh and bone, because, Parshuramji was born in the 19th Mahayug, the 19th cycle of Yugas. And Sri Ram was born in the 24th cycle. and still you find Parshuram, him in the 24th cycle. And again, you find Parshuram in the 28th cycle when the Mahabharata happened, which was the present cycle of yugas. Okay, so he finds place in the Mahabharata as well, where he meets Bhishma Pitama, he teaches Karn. So there's so many places where you see Parshuram appearing. So according to the scriptures, it's in flesh and bone that they are supposed to be living, and that is why they are called immortals or Chiranjeevis. And Parshuram is one of the main 7 or 8 Chiranjeevis that are counted, the Sapta or the Ashta Chiranjeevis. So, it could be, it's up to us, what to believe. It could be that, his disciples are continuing his teachings and, he's there in spirit. Or it could be, interestingly, there could be another aspect to it that, he was reborn probably with a memory of his previous lives. For all you know, it could be somebody. What separates us from our previous lives is just the loss of memory. If you believe in reincarnation, just because we do not remember our past lives, we believe we are a new individual. But what if he was born or reborn with the memory of his past life, multiple times? So he has the memory of his multiple past lives, and that is a way to say that he's immortal. So, there's no way to say what could be the principle behind calling him a Chiranjeevi or others a Chiranjeevi, but there's various ways it could come true. The lesson is that, the wisdom of Parshuram is not lost, or his purpose is not lost. And he's still waiting for Kalki, the last avatar, to appear and, fulfill his final duties or responsibility of teaching the next avatar.
So actually, say, these tales and these stories from our mythology have been immortalized through our generations, through ballads, through tales, through folklore. But what, especially the new generation, what they find themselves to be at the forefront is the historicity of it, and whether to just leave it as fiction or mythology, or to actually believe them that they happened or they are still around. So where does one draw a logical line and draw a logical conclusion to this?
Right. I know, Vedant, a lot of people have these questions. But I feel, there is the time spans in our scriptures are so vast that it is almost impossible to find historical evidence of everything that is said. There will have to be some things that have to be taken by faith. You will never be able to prove everything. So for any religion, that is true. You will never ever be able to prove everything which is written in the books, just because the timelines are vast. Even for the relatively newer religions, which are just 2000 or 1500 years old, you cannot find historical evidence. There's anecdotal evidence, or there's literature, which supports, or scriptural evidence. But how much of historical evidence can you find that such a such person existed, or he or she performed such a miracle? Right? So there are things that would have to be taken by faith, in faith, and there are things that can be proved. So there are, for example, mentions of astrological mentions in the scriptures. In the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, in both of them, there are so many astrological conjunctions that are described. For example, at the time of birth of Sri Ram, what was the star chart that is described. And there are ways to use this information using softwares. There's a software called Planetarium, and there are other softwares in which you can put those conjunctions or arrangements of stars and navgrihas, etc., that are mentioned, and you arrive at a date. So people have tried to do that, which has actually given rise to some historical dates. And there are multiple events in the epics that are described, and you can actually create a very smooth timeline by plotting those that data. You actually get a very smooth timeline, which is in line with what the scriptures are saying. So I believe somewhere, the question is not really about these events being historical or not. I think the question is about how much are we willing to believe, and what is the purpose of asking that question. If the purpose of asking that question about historicity is just to disprove that these things happen, there's no point. You don't even get into it. If the question is about having a better understanding that all these things actually did happen, there is enough proof available to show or to tell us that yes, there is a there's a huge probability that these things did happen. And again, the lessons that are to be learned from these events or the epics or the legends in the epics are what are more important, rather than fighting over whether it's history or mythology. We completely miss the boat, when we completely miss the plot when we get into those arguments. The importance, our ancients never ever bothered about writing down things in a way that they would be considered historical, as in it's in a dry form. Our ancients always wrote literature embellished with stories, with situations, with moral conundrums, that would make these stories relevant, and that would make the lessons memorable. So for them, it was not about proving whether Sri Ram existed, Sri Krishna existed or not. It was about sharing the lessons from their lives with people and teaching them the right path in life.
That's very well said. So what you said, that the goal and the aim should not be to nitpick about things, but rather to draw from the understandings and to use them in your life.
Right.
That's very well said. So, like you mentioned about the different versions of Ramayana and Mahabharata and how we interpret them. So, we know the most popular version of Ramayana, especially in northern India, is that written by Valmiki along with the poem by Tulsidas. So that we know the basic plot and how the things happen. But what I found through reading was that in one of the Ramayanas, this is called the Adbhut Ramayana. This is also written by Valmiki. The story actually does not end at Sri Ram defeating Ravan and going back to Ayodhya. This actually extends to another war where not Sri Ram, but actually Ma Sita takes the form of Mahakali. So, what do you have to say about these things, where the stories that we already know in the mainstream have regional variations, and how do we deal with this and understand this?
So again, Vedant, it's an example of what I was saying earlier, that for our rishis, I mean, see, claiming that this was also written by Valmiki would provide it legitimacy, right? So, but it may or may not be true. But again, there's no way for us to decide, who wrote it or who didn't. But the point is that there are our rishis or sages, they wanted us to understand various lessons, through these scriptures, and showing Sita doing, in the entire Ramayana. Otherwise, Sita is a little bit shown, helpless, where she's thrown into certain circumstances without a recourse to remedy it herself. She has to take help of a husband or someone, So this was probably a way to balance out the narrative, that where Sita is shown to counter that Sahasra Ravan, the demon, uh, who's about whom they come to know later after they return to Ayodhya. And even Lord Ram is not able to tackle that demon, whereas Sita has to take the form of Mahakali to destroy that demon. It was just a way to balance the narrative, I feel, in a time where probably Shaktism was on a rise. And that is when, these versions would have been created. Like, even in the north, as you said, we know about Valmiki Ramayana and Ramcharitmanas. But Ramcharitmanas varies widely, differs hugely from the Valmiki Ramayana. In the Valmiki Ramayana, there is no mention of a Lakshman Rekha. There is no incident of a Dhobi telling his wife, that I will not keep you in my home like Ram did for Sita, etc. These events are from Ramcharitmanas. They're not even in Valmiki Ramayana, And in fact, in the Valmiki Ramayana, Hanuman goes to get the Sanjeevani, and not just the Sanjeevani, he's asked to bring 4 different types of herbs. And that is why he gets confused that, he can't identify 4 different types of herbs on the mountain. And that's why he just picks up the entire mountain and comes. So, there's so many differences in the Valmiki Ramayana itself. But I would say, the adaptations or the different versions are built on the original Valmiki Ramayana. So they can be considered, suitable for a particular time or region or place. But the original would always remain Valmiki Ramayana. So what is mentioned in the original text, in the Valmiki Ramayana, would be considered more accurate. Whereas the other versions, the versions in other parts of the country, or even the later adaptations, the translations, all of them are adaptations of the original Valmiki Ramayana.
it's interesting that you mentioned Shaktism, because I was going to come to it. Now, see, in our religion, this is the difference, that this is the difference between our Eastern and Dharmic religions vis-a-vis the Western and Abrahamic religions. Here, we actually, one is free to pray and reach the Almighty in whichever form of the Almighty that he or she wishes to do so. So that's why we have different traditions itself in Hinduism. We have Shaivism, that is the tradition of worshipping Shiva as the supreme. We have similarly we have Shaktism, where Devi is considered supreme, and we have Vaishnavism. We have also Smartism, where they consider a mix of few Vedic goddesses and gods to worship. So, what do you look about this when we say God is one? Again, this, you can say that the leap of faith question again comes in, and the each tradition actually considers their idol and their deity to be the most supreme, and others are also incorporated, but in, of course, subservient ways and different ways. So, how do you look at this?
So, Vedant, interestingly, this question I've been answering, a lot recently. And in a couple of podcasts, I've actually answered this question because a lot of people, again, have this confusion about which God is supreme. And I think just a couple of days back, I uploaded a video on YouTube as well explaining this. So, what most of us don't understand is that the Purans are not a homogeneous literature. There are 18 Mahapurans, and then there are 18 Up-Purans. So there are a lot of Purans. Okay, so these Purans, which highlight one god or the other as supreme, all of them deal with a different time period of Brahma. So in each day of Brahma, the gods manifested in a different way. So the Shiv Puran actually says that the gods, the Trinity, they emerge from each other in different ways in different kalpas. So sometimes it's Shiva who creates Brahma and Vishnu, whereas at other times, it's Vishnu who does it, or sometimes even Brahma does it. So, this is written in the Shiv Puran. So when the Purans themselves are clearly stating that, the gods appear from each other in different ways in different days of Brahma. So there you have the solution, to that confusion that, why different gods are there. But we don't know because we don't read the Purans. So we don't know that this is the case. And we tend to fight that, no, Devi is supreme, or Krishna is supreme, or Shiva is supreme. But for our rishis and sages, they never thought of explaining it because they assumed that this was common knowledge that everybody knew, at least in that time when they were writing down. They expected everybody to understand that all of them are different manifestations of the same supreme god. They never imagined that this will lead to sectism and sectarianism, So I think that's, again, because of the discontinuity of our cultural, or knowledge, which was there in our civilization, that has led to this misunderstanding that all the Purans, and a lot of people don't even consider Purans worth reading just because of this. They say, no, in every Puran, the story is a little different. But the reason for that is that each Puran is telling the story from which happened in a different day of Brahma. And a lot of these events, a lot of the gods are the same in these stories. A lot of characters are the same, but it's just the outcome that is different. Or even if the outcome is the same, it is arrived at in a different way. So, I think from a scientific perspective or from a modern perspective, it is very similar to what is happening in a metaverse. When you see, series, if you've seen the series like Flash, or if you've seen, the Spider-Man movie that recently came out, they're showing that there's Spider-Man in every universe, right? But how he becomes a Spider-Man, what is his life journey is different. There are more or less same characters in everybody's lives, but the situations are different. What is common is that all of them become Spider-Man and they're fighting evil, and that is exactly what our Purans tell you. So, these are the same characters or similar characters, but things are happening in a different way. And that is why there are differences in the stories. So I think there is no confusion if you know this truth, that, it is only telling the same story in a different manner, in a different way. And then again, it is believed that all the Purans were penned down by Ved Vyas. So if the author is the same, why would he want to portray different gods differently? If the author is the same, it just makes sense that he's telling the stories of different time periods.
True, true. Absolutely. So now I would like to ask you that, especially because we are based in Bengal, and in Bengal, even though the each region in India has its own form and form of deity and its own form of beliefs being popular in that specific region, and in Bengal, we actually observe that the worship of the mother goddess is more prevalent as vis-a-vis the other gods and deities that we have, and more so the tantric practices that are there. So this also I'm going to ask you that there's a normal way of worshipping mother goddess, but there's also the tantric practices which normally we people don't do at our home. So can you elaborate how these two practices are different and why we do not indulge in them in our daily life?
As you said, there are different sects in Hinduism, right? So similarly, it's not just about focusing on a particular god. There is also the freedom in Hinduism to approach God in the way that you identify with. So the Purans and the scriptures explain that, based on your propensity, there are the three gunas, that we talk about, the sattvic, rajasic, and the tamasic gun. So people who are in the sattvic mode, they would prefer following the regular course of worship, which is called the Dakshin Marg, which is the regular course of worship of God through, sattvic means, which is like offering of a flower or a fruit or milk, or, something which does not involve killing an animal or a higher consciousness, right? The Rajasic people would tend to worship God in a way that identifies with their own personality, which would be, performing a grand yagna, or, you may have heard of people preparing chappan bhog for worship, There's so many dishes prepared for God. So they identify with that. They like to do it because that is their personality. They are in that Rajasic mode of passion. Okay, and people who are in the tamasic mode, they would like to, again, approach God in the way that they identify with, which is, through the offering of bali or sacrifice, of animal sacrifice. And certain gods, certain deities are also offered alcohol. So these things which are prohibited in the normal dakshin marg, they are allowed in the vam marg, which is tantra. And there's the 5 M's which are allowed in the Vam Marg, which are traditionally prohibited in the Dakshin Marg. But so I would say that that doesn't make this path wrong necessarily. It is just a different path to approach God. But it is just that this path is a little more dangerous because you are very susceptible to indulgence in the 5 M's, which um, can overpower you, as in alcohol, use of alcohol. If you yourself start taking alcohol, if you're giving it as an offering to God and then you're taking it as prasad, who's to stop you from consuming that alcohol, right? And how much of that alcohol will you consume, as calling it prasad? So there is a little danger of getting waylaid, using this path. And that is why it is said, even though it's a valid path, but you should not venture on it unless you have a qualified guru to guide you. So the path is there, and the path was established by various rishis, various sages. In fact, even Vashisht, who's the Kulguru of Suryavanshis, in some of the scriptures, he's mentioned to have worshipped goddess Tara. Right, so and Bengal has the Tara Peeth, which was there, and Tara is a major goddess in Tibetan Buddhism. So Vashisht Rishi is believed to have. I'm not remembering the scripture, but I've read it in one of the scriptures that he was believed to have gone to Tibet to worship Tara. So it's not that this path itself is wrong. It's just that unless you know how to do it, and unless you know how to approach God properly in this way under guidance by a guru, it will be dangerous for you. So that is why it is not indulged in regularly, on a regular basis inside our homes, because we do not have the capacity or the guidance to control it, or to control the effects that would happen. It should be done under the guidance of a qualified person only. That is the only reason. And again, because a lot of people wonder, why is Tantrism or Shaktism more prevalent in the East? So I would say, there is this interesting phenomena of you see there are 51 Shakti Peeths throughout the Indian subcontinent, right? And almost I think 15 or 16 of them are in Bengal and around. So
true.
considering Bengal, Bangladesh, Assam together, so there are close to 20 Shakti Peeths only in this region. So wherever you have a Shakti Peeth, there would definitely be a Shakti Sadhana would be more prominent. The Shaktism sect would be more prominent. And that is one of the reasons, So I think it's again, it's the beauty of our culture and of Hinduism, of our religion, that all of us, we approach God in a different way, in a different format, and still, we are all able to coexist together. And interestingly, the Purans, they do not belittle other gods, So, for example, the Shiv Purans, they say that Shiva is supreme, but they do not, they also mention in multiple places that Shiva and Vishnu are one and the same. And the same is true for Vaishnava Purans. They would say Vishnu is supreme, but they also mention that it's only a fool who would differentiate between Vishnu and Shiva. So the Purans, even though they make one God supreme, they still respect the other gods and identify them as just another manifestation of the same God. And as as is said in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, that Krishna and Vishnu are like curd and milk. So it's the same thing for Vishnu and Shiva. So that they are just different forms. It's like heat and light, which is rising from the same flame. So that's the concept that we have to understand.
That was very, very, very well said. And since you mentioned about Tibet and goddess Tara featuring there, I was actually going to ask you, not only Tara, actually all the Dasa Mahavidyas that we have in Hinduism, we actually see a lot of overlap between these concepts of Hinduism and between one of the sects of Buddhism, that is Vajrayana Buddhism practiced in Tibet. And actually we see this influence of Indic religions in a lot of places which were erstwhile part of the Indian civilization, whether they be on the western on the western side, that is Gandharva region, Afghanistan region, or especially the Southeast Asia portions. The current demographics may be different, but the Indonesia part of region, Java, Sumatra, Bali, we see a lot of Indian influence. Even the largest temple that is in Cambodia, that was an erstwhile Hindu temple. So my question is, a lot of the mythology that we see, the stories that we see, are we to assume that they are based on mainland India or throughout the world, or of the geography as we see it?
Vedant, according to the scriptures, most of the stories are based in the Indian subcontinent. It is just that, they were aware of the tribes who were living around. In fact, in my book on Maharaj Bharat, I've actually tried to identify the various tribes that were living around across our borders. And these were the barbarians who were trying to attack India, from multiple times. That has happened across our history, that, multiple invasions have happened. So even the ancient times were no different. And Maharaj Bharat's story actually revolves around the various other tribes that are living across our borders, both in the west and in the east. And India, it was the cradle of civilization at that time. I would say, if you go by history, it was India and China, that were quite ahead of their times, compared to the other countries and other civilizations. And then, of course, you have Mesopotamia and Sumeria. And then later on, you have the Greeks and the Romans. And of course, Egyptians were there almost at the same time as our civilization. But the events of our scriptures are primarily based in the Indian subcontinent. And there's a reason for that, because, they clearly define the geography of Bharat. And they tell us that, the land right from Himalayas to the Southern Ocean is Bharat. And they tell us, they talk only about the events happening in this region. So there are instances when Indian kings are moving out to conquer other regions when the other regions are mentioned. The geography of other regions is definitely mentioned in all Purans. All the Purans give the geography, the cycle of creation, destruction, the genealogies of the Surya Vansh and the Chandra Vansh. All the Purans are supposed to mention these. But the details about other kingdoms and other people who may be living there are not given in detail, primarily because these were books meant for people living in the Indian subcontinent. And these other regions do find mention when you find some tribes attacking the kings or the kingdoms in Bharat, or when Indian kings were going out to conquer. So the influence that we're talking about, that we see, is on the Western side. It is because the Indo-European heritage was common. It was the same people who were living, or who, like, if you believe the Western historians, they would say that it was the Indo-Aryan stock of people who came and populated this region. But there's no proof to support that theory. It's just a theory. On the other hand, there's also the out of India theory, wherein we mention that, and our scriptures do mention stories like that. There's the story of a king called Yayati, who had 5 sons, and one of them became his heir, and he was displeased with the other four, and he banished them out of India. So he banished them out of the kingdom, basically, which was centered in the northern part of the country. So some of them went to the south, and they established kingdoms there. But some of them went to the east and the west. They went outside India, and they established religions or kingdoms or civilizations or societies there. So, for example, the Yavans, who were the Mediterranean people, or the Greeks, basically, so they are believed to be related to us, in the scriptures, because it was the same stock of people who were moving out. Parsis, we know, have so many similarities. The language of the Vendida is very similar to Vedic Sanskrit, and the customs, the rituals of Soma or of fire worship. There's so many things that are very, very common, So these were same people who were moving out in the West for various reasons, maybe for trade, maybe for conquering, maybe they were banished, etc. In the East, it was primarily because of trade. Because Indian traders especially from the coastal kingdoms, from Odisha to the south, everybody traveled outside, and they went and established their kingdoms, and they established ports, they trading ports, etc. And that is why I see a lot of Indian influence in the Southeast Asian region. So there are different reasons for that influence, but it definitely was a very prominent for the longest period. And it was only the advent of the relatively newer religions that that disconnect started happening.
And how do we actually make people and make more like people like ourselves to be able to connect to that past? Is that only through reading?
Travel, I would suggest, travel is a good way to do that, because I found out these similarities through travel, because I was traveling to this region. For Europe, maybe it would be reading, because travel would not really help you connect, because paganism does not exist there anymore, right? These are all called pagan religions. But in Southeast Asia, you see remnants of this of their heritage. They're very proud of it.
They
All their
accepted
music.
it as their culture.
Yes, they've accepted as the culture. Ramayana is considered the national epic in most of the Southeast Asian countries, and they believe it is their own heroes.
Yeah.
They believe Rama was born here. So they have accepted it very beautifully, and they've amalgamated it, with their own beliefs. Like even in Japan, you see, the native religions, the Shinto, and the animism that they used to follow. It was very beautifully, merged with Buddhism, which was coming from India. So a lot of these Southeast Asian countries, primarily again, because of the prevalence of Buddhism, or Buddhism being a majority religion in most of these countries, they have preserved the heritage that they received from India. So even the Buddhist kings, or even the Buddhist people, they still follow a lot of Hindu customs in these countries.
Actually, there's a lot of overlap in all the dharmic religions, like whether Sikhism, Jainism, Hinduism. You can see a
Of
lot of
course.
things being common. And like one of the things that you were mentioning about kings being sent out of India, and about the overlaps, the historical overlaps that we see in our mythology. There's one observation about the concept of Trinity, because we also have it. We see it in the Greek mythology. We see it elsewhere. So is it just a coincidence, or are we to assume that there was some connect between these two?
I'm sure there was some connect. See, the modern religions, or I would say the recent religions, they were heavily inspired from the beliefs of people who were living there, earlier. So a lot of scholars have actually theorized that, the Mesopotamian beliefs were instrumental in shaping early Christian beliefs. In fact, there are certain scholars that actually also theorized that Jesus probably lived in India for a while, and he was learning from Buddhist gurus, at that time. So there are various thoughts or various theories, but there are definitely similarities between these religions, primarily because of a existing belief of in these regions, which is very similar to what we believe in Hinduism, which was, a belief in multiple deities, a belief in guardian spirits, a belief in living in harmony with your environment, a belief in respecting your ecology, the nature around you. All these were pagan beliefs, and you find spirits and forest spirits, river nymphs, mountain spirits, guardians, and in all these older religions. So there was, I think they had a very common template, to begin with, before they started migrating to different paths.
Yeah, that's true. And like we, as you said, that they had a common template. Even throughout the subcontinent, you can see that even though with the popular mainstream gods and the regional gods are there, but even in villages, every person belonging on the origin of your family, you also have your Kul Devta, you also have your Isht Devta, you have your Gram Devta. So these are separate, and these are specifically regional deities apart from the mainstream deities that we worship. So this is
Yes.
also, and you are, and actually you see these people, most of them to be very more devoted to their Kul Devta because they definitely believe them to be more superior for their welfare and their family's welfare.
So these are the guardian spirits, which we our scriptures talk about, and they call them yakshas. So yakshas and yakshis, these are the guardian spirits, especially of natural resources. So you will find, most forests would have a temple dedicated to a goddess or a spirit. Most mountains you'll find small kul devtas, and especially in Himachal, Uttaranchal, you'll find this is a very common phenomena, where there's small, tiny villages, and each of them has their own guardian deity. And of course, they are identified as a avatar or a manifestation of a better known deity. But again, that comes from the same philosophy of Hinduism, that all different manifestations come from the same supreme God. I think, which is the beauty of a culture, which we just don't appreciate it, that India is so big, and our states, some of the states are bigger than European countries, right? And you see how Europeans pride on their language, their culture. Each of the country behaves as if it's each of the country, which is no bigger than our states, they have so much pride in their own heritage, and they consider that the way we have done things, no one else has. And they have their own beliefs, they have evolved their own languages and their own beliefs. Whereas in India, we have a population which is much bigger. Some states, of course, have a more sense of pride than other states, but we don't consider ourselves individual entities, and we always tend to find that common ground between our beliefs. We always tend to link back to the main source of Supreme Brahman being the source of all these different manifestations that we are worshipping. And this is a point that has kept us together all these thousands of years, that, even though there were various kingdoms, various rulers who were actually fighting with each other also, but people never considered themselves as enemies. And that is the reason India is surviving as a country, even today. Otherwise, we would have broken into something like a European Union.
Yeah. So the idea of being together as part of the Indian subcontinent basically has prevented balkanization in India. We can say.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so my concluding question to you would be: this was an amazing session, and it was so much to learn from you. And even though I'm shooting with many more questions right now, it won't be fair to you. So my concluding question to you would be that, of course, so at the end of the session, we have come to the conclusion that there are so many stories, so many things that we are still don't know, so many underrated characters apart from the mainstream ones so many underrated subplots and stories, the regional variations that we don't know. So how does one, especially young people, youngsters of this generation, connect with them? Is it through books like the ones that you have written, or is it going back through the original scriptures, the Shrutis, the Vedas, the Gitas, to them?
So, Vedant, again, I get that question a lot, and I would always suggest you to read the original scriptures. I think that is the best source. It's not that there are a lot of commentaries available, there are a lot of adaptations available. But if you really want to find out what is written in the scriptures, there's no way better than to actually read the scriptures. And a lot of people think that this is a very difficult thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not so. In today's day and age, everything is available online. At least all the major scriptures are available online. You don't have to finish the entire scripture in one sitting, right? Whatever time you get in your daily schedule, fix a time, that I'll spend half an hour reading, from this Puran or, the Vedas or the Bhagavad Gita every day. And slowly you start understanding, the purpose of these teachings, the depth of these teachings. They are so beautiful and they're so well written, keeping in mind the questions that normal human beings have in their life. So Bhagavad Gita, and I'm recently I read this commentary by Swami Mukundananda, and he's done a very nice, simple commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, and I would recommend everybody to check it out in English if you're comfortable with English. For Hindi, there's the Gita Press Gorakhpur, versions which are available, which are very simple to read. And not just of the Bhagavad Gita, there are other books also available. So they're very simple translations without any interpretation, without any unnecessary interpretation. So it's left to you to make what you want out of it. And if you want a commentary from somebody, there are those also available. So I would recommend always going to the source rather than taking someone else's word on it. And if you find it still difficult, there's always books, as you said. There's certain books that have been written in modern times, by people who want to share this knowledge with others. So they may be fiction, they may be non-fiction, but there are books available, and they are again available as paperback, available as ebooks or Kindle. So it's easy to download one and start reading. And of course, there's podcasts now. There are interviews and podcasts, and which are available on Spotify. They're available on YouTube. There's so much that is available. So it's up to you what you want to pick up, but do pick up something.
Yeah, and we all take inspiration from you, like you did. Like it's been almost more than a decade that you have been doing this. So, what actually drives you to this? It's a personal question I'm asking to you.
Oh, well, Vedant, I think the only driving force for me is to share this knowledge with as many people as I can. So I'm not, my blog, I started in 2011, and I never monetized it, and I didn't want to earn money out of it by getting ads and Google ads and stuff like that. My purpose was to make it available on internet so that anybody in the world, if he has, or if he or she has that same query, they have access to the answer. Someone, which was me, I've gone to enough trouble to find the answer and put it in one place. And I did not want to patent it or, earn copyright over it, because that's not my copyright. That's not my creation. It's just my understanding of what I've read, which is already available freely, and that's the driving force for me, that sharing that knowledge and, helping others understand if they have the same questions as I did, and making people aware of their culture and their heritage in a way that they find suitable for them. So that is why I've done the blog, I've written the books, because a lot of people do not read blogs, or they're more comfortable reading a book. And that's the reason I'm doing podcasts nowadays, so that there are a lot of people who do not read at all, either blog or books, so they can also learn something and at least get that the spark can be ignited in them to find out more.
So, absolutely, that's really well said. That in today's day and age, there's definitely no lack of resources to you to pay for. So it's it's actually you who need to start.
Yes, completely.
It has been wonderful, Dr. Vineet Aggarwal, speaking to you. This has been really an opportunity that I feel I'm blessed with. And to all our viewers on Utsav App, we request you to please read Dr. Vineet Aggarwal's books to actually get their sense and the true magic of what he means. Because even though we are trying to make this easy for you all and for us to be able to communicate better and understand these concepts, the magic lies in the book. It cannot be just said away within 30 minutes in the podcast. So I really request all of you to read the book and also follow Utsav App for more engaging sessions. We are devoted and we are committed to exploring Indian culture, mythology, and scriptures in full extent and with all our might. So please do follow and subscribe to Utsav App. And we really hope, Dr. Aggarwal, that we can do this again sometime in future.
Definitely, Vedant. Thank you so much. And again, appreciation for all the efforts that you guys are putting in reviving our culture and heritage and connecting, them with the youth of our country. So you guys are doing a great job, and I wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir.